Welcome to the Histories of Northamptonshire podcast series, and this episode number 19. Recorded on location, each episode tells the story of one of the many and varied objects which are the focus of the exhibition A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects. The exhibition runs at the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery between the 20th of September 2025 and February 2026. Selected by local individuals, heritage groups and the museum's own curators, each object tells a different story from the county's past. And so, to our guest for this episode.
I'm Andy Chapman, and I've been a professional archaeologist for over 50 years now. I'm retired, but I'm still involved with Northamptonshire Archaeological Society, so I'm still involved in talking about archaeology and publishing both my excavations and other people's excavations, so I haven't managed to escape it yet.
Andy, tell me about the object that represents the Northampton Archaeological Society on this occasion.
I've chosen the Iron Age Rotary Quern.
Right, two terms that are necessarily needing explanation. What is a rotary quern?
Well, if we start with quern is the stone object that you use to turn your hard cereal grains into flour. And for 3,000 years, they've been doing it the hard way, using the saddle quern with a rubbing stone. So you're down on your hands and knees, pushing a stone backwards and forwards to crush those grains into flour. Very hard work, very time-consuming. By the time we get into the Middle Iron Age, they're growing wheat and barley on a much bigger scale. So they need a more efficient way of creating flour. And somebody, about 200 BC or so, comes up with the rotary quern. So you have a mechanical device that you can turn by hand or using a pole attached to your roof timbers. So suddenly you've gone from on your hands and knees with a rubbing stone to a device that rotates, and you've got a bottom stone and a top stone, and the grains crush between those two stones. The bottom stone sits in the floor of your roundhouse. On top of it, there's your rotating stone with a wooden handle, so you rotate the stone round and it crushes it down. You're talking perhaps about 4 or 5 times more efficient, or multiple times more efficient than the old saddle quern. So this is the first, in that sense, mechanised milling. It's also, of course, industrial production.
Well, yes, this is technological advancement.
You can't use the Northamptonshire ironstone to make a quern, a rotary quern. It's too soft. You'd end up with such gritty flour, it would grind your teeth down even faster than with a hard rotary stone. So first of all, we've got trade. These objects are coming in from various parts of the country. Most commonly, it's the millstone grit, appropriately named. It's the millstone grit from the Peak District that turns up perhaps half the querns in Northamptonshire. They're being manufactured up there. Each stone type has a distinctive style of quern, so clearly they're being manufactured at the source. A rotary quern set, about 58 kilograms, brand new. That's a lot of weight. They're quarrying the stone, they're creating these rotary querns, and they're trading them down the country. And significant thing for Northamptonshire is that when they dug out the middle of Hunsbury Hill in the 19th century, in the storage pits, they recovered over 100 rotary querns. So Hunsbury Hill seems to be acting as a distribution centre.
I was about to say, are we talking about a showroom for somebody?
Well, essentially, whoever was the chieftain who was sitting at Hunsbury Hill was trading them out into the neighbouring settlements. So doing a very good trade, presumably, at the time.
You mentioned the weight of a rotary quern. Not a small and easily transported item. How would they have got to this part of the country? Would they have come down by water? Would they have come down on a cart of some description?
I think we're looking at carts, most likely. But you wouldn't be able to transport many of them on an Iron Age cart.
Well, precisely. Presumably they would have had to have been a caravan of some kind, or a lot of labour to get one down from Derbyshire to
which
here.
Makes them very special, valuable items. So we're talking about a trade distribution network, objects that were highly valued, and certainly once they come in, every wife of the Iron Age would want a rotary quern. They're not going to be on their hands and knees using a saddle quern, so they come in very rapidly.
Right. So we're talking about now a domestic item. I thought we were talking about something that was more sort of industrial and being used for an entire community rather than just a single family.
I think every family would have had their own rotary quern in their house. So we're talking about a trade in the objects, but once they come down, it would be very much at household level. Some Iron Age communities may have been more communal and family-based. That's another story. That's another complicated story. But
that's fascinating to me as a journalist, because what you're talking about is a parallel to perhaps a microwave or a fridge or an air fryer in today's modern society. Back then, a quern would have been a required item for food production for an individual family. That's a very specific use and presumably a reflection of well-being, of wealth, or maybe status?
Yes, it's also reflecting that by the Middle Iron Age, you're looking at arable production has grown hugely. One of the reasons the Romans invade Britain in the first century is to get hold of the wheat. Britain is a wheat-producing country, and they need that to feed Rome. So it's the scale of production, and it's becoming a much more central part of their diet. You've got to start producing that flour more easily than the old-fashioned way, and that drives the trade forward.
Presumably that also means that communities had developed. We're talking populations here rather than small communities in small gatherings.
We start to see a huge increase in the number of settlements from about 400 BC. So the early Iron Age, it's still very sparse and sporadic. I'm sure we're not seeing all the settlements, but suddenly 400 BC you start seeing these settlements full of roundhouses. They're leaving a big impact on the landscape that we, as archaeologists, we can find. And up the Nen Valley, there's perhaps one of these settlements about every kilometre or so. So we're suddenly talking about a landscape that's quite densely occupied by farming communities, and arable agriculture has become central to driving that forward. The bone assemblage from Iron Age sites is quite boring because it's all domesticated animals.
Would this then have been a prized item, or would it have been simply a necessity that everybody would have had?
It's been argued by archaeologists up in Yorkshire who've done a big study of their querns, and they came up with the idea that they might have been valuable enough to be a dowry object. Part of their arguing for that was they had half a quern on one site, there was half a quern on a site several miles away, and that was the same quern. It had been split in two, and the two parts had been moved several miles apart. Now, their theory, and it's only a theory, was that one half stayed with her husband's family in their settlement, and did the other half go back to her original family. It's a theory, but it's one that has a big appeal, because we do find a lot of querns have been killed. They are split in two vertically at some stage, when they're potentially still usable. So for some reason, that quern can't be used anymore. So their theory is, if the woman dies, her quern cannot be used by anybody else. A quern doesn't just break when you drop it.
No. So
you've got to literally split it with a hammer and chisel. That's quite common find.
We're sitting at the Ark, within sight of the River Nen this morning. Just upstream from where we are sitting is Whitworth Mill. A little bit further across Northamptonshire is Haygates, known for its milling and mills. So all of that history can be traced back to that arable farming that went on, and the need, therefore, to produce in volume the flour to make food for people to survive on.
And that first mechanisation of the process, yes, belongs in that period of the Iron Age, about 200 BC. The need to produce flour more quickly and easily. It even affects their pots. I've been looking at some of the Iron Age pots, and they get bigger. Once you get into that part, 200 BC, they're producing bigger storage jars, because now, of course, they need more grain to produce more flour. So they're making bigger pots to hold the grain and the flour.
Which means that in terms of production of food, seasonality, of course, was extremely important. But the ability to store what had already been milled meant that you could create food during the spring, the summer, and then you would have a store for the winter and the colder times when production would have been harder. Yes,
they're storing their food either in underground granaries when the geology is suitable, or in granaries above ground. So probably for one of the first times in history, they've got some sense of food security. Yes, they're putting food into store, and it can be quickly turned into usable flour.
Which means mechanisation in production of the raw ingredients to make bread, food, in whatever form, but also increasing sophistication within society in terms of how to use the ingredients in the longer term.
Yes, all around it shows the Iron Age tend to get looked down on in relation to the Romans. Yes, they didn't live in stone houses. They didn't go around in togas. But they were a sophisticated society with a social structure to it.
Andy, why should this item be one of the 100 in the exhibition telling the stories of this county?
I think for the very reasons we've been talking about, it marks an important point in history when we can see development of items to fulfill a need. They're producing a mechanical item to fulfill a requirement to produce flour more quickly. So it does mark, I think, a turning point in society at the time, and does tell us a lot about the Iron Age people, that they were a lot more sophisticated, and society was a lot more structured than most people would believe for people living in mud huts. That's just how they get dismissed so often.
I love the parallels that you've been able to paint for us with your descriptions of the Rotary Quern. Something that looks very brutal, it's not decorated, it is very functional, and yet what it tells us about society, what it tells us about the people of Northamptonshire from that era, it's a fascinating story. Thank you for telling me the story.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this Histories of Northamptonshire podcast. If you would like to find out more about the objects or listen to other episodes in the series, go to www.northamptonmuseums.com. Alternatively, you can visit the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery, where you can see the A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects exhibition for yourself. The Histories of Northamptonshire project is funded by Arts Council England as part of the National Portfolio Programme.